Hi, I'm David with EV World News. We talk about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock markets. Bill is out today, and I have Bobby Primus subbing in for Bill. Bobby, how are you doing today?
Excellent. How are you, David?
Doing good, doing good. So glad you could step in today. Bill had to travel, kind of like a family health emergency.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear
Go
that.
go see buddy. Yeah, go see somebody. Anyways, but we'll cover the topic that you had sent me, but we'll talk about some other things to start out with. Let me see. So one of them, Rivian. We get some news about Rivian. Rivian's price target for this year has been lowered by some people to $10 from 12. And I find that fascinating. I think a lot of it is they think that the tariffs are going to hurt Rivian. And I'm just like, I'm not so sure.
How
They're an
so?
American
They're all
company.
American built, aren't they?
Well,
They're
so here's
probably
the
getting
thing.
some parts from Mexico or China.
So Teslas are the most American made car, but
Yeah,
30% of their parts are made in Mexico and Canada.
yeah. I
Okay,
don't see
so
how you could afford it if it wasn't.
yeah, it's just so there's issues there. Rivian's close to being as American made as Tesla, but it's we did, Rivian didn't actually come up with the list. We did a review on last year's most American made cars, and Rivian wasn't even in the list. So somehow
Wow.
they got skipped. But like in the top 10 spots, 3 were Teslas, 4 were Volkswagen. No, I'm sorry, 1 was a Volkswagen,
Mhm.
4 were Hondas or Acuras. And the
Wow.
only big 3 vehicle was the Jeep Gladiator pickup truck.
Wow.
It was number
Yeah.
8, the 8th most American made vehicle. And in the top
Mhm.
20, the only other big 3 vehicle was a Chevy Corvette. It came in at like number 19.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it was really dominated by Honda. Honda and Honda and Tesla are the 2 most American made vehicles.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of funny. And then you had like Hyundai Kia was in there, and Volkswagen had a couple of vehicles. But
But I would think
anyways,
at some point all of them have some parts, at least some parts manufactured out of the country just for
right.
cost savings.
Right. Yeah. Well, absolutely they do. And so this is one of the things where the tariffs were enacted very quickly, and there's really not a
Mhm.
lot of time for manufacturers to react. You can't,
Yeah.
if you need,
You can't
specific.
onshore those. Yeah, you can't onshore big manufacturing facilities overnight. It's going to take years.
Yeah, it's, I don't know how quickly they can get into some of it, but I was really surprised um, that they're really factoring that they think Rivian won't do that great because of tariffs. And it's like, if
Mm,
anything, you'd have thought they'd be one that would do a
do the
little better.
best. Yeah, because
Yeah.
they said that new gravity is really shocking to be there,
Well, that's Lucid.
shockingly
That's
good.
Lucid. That's the Lucid. The Lucid's the Gravity. This was Rivian. So the
Okay.
Gravity is a Lucid SUV.
Lucid product. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's American made, right?
Yes, American, but they're just
So
not doing volume. Yeah.
no, not when that you're cranking out. I think last year Lucid sold nearly 9,000 vehicles or something like that.
Mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
it's more. The year before they'd sold like 1,500.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So it's still,
Yeah.
it was huge gain, but it's not to where it's
Yeah.
making them profitable. They're still losing a lot of money per vehicle.
Absolutely.
Um, Now, here was something that came up that I was kind of surprised about, because I've talked a lot about how, so Nissan in the United States has the Leaf, right? And the Leaf
Right.
has sold over 1 million vehicles in the United States. Okay.
Mhm.
And the Leaf has been an electric vehicle in the US longer than um, Tesla's had vehicles out there.
Yes.
Okay. At least, the Model S came out in like 2012. Okay. There was a
Right.
Roadster before that or something like that,
Mhm.
but it wasn't, but a handful of people ever got their hands on those, right?
Yeah.
But as far as a mass production car, Tesla didn't really start doing anything until 2012, but the Leaf had already been out for a couple of years before that. And Nissan really, they've had this Ariya SUV for the last couple of years. They didn't make a lot of fuss about it or anything. It's not been just anything that took over the market. Well, now Nissan suddenly says they have a new scalable EV platform to support up to 5 models. including a lifestyle pickup. And here is, I don't know if this is a rendering or if this, I'm suspecting
Wow.
this is probably a rendering, but I don't know 100%. I mean, that would look pretty cool. The
Yeah.
idea of opening up the back here
Hmm.
is a pretty nice. I mean, it has very Ford Bronco-ish, feelings to it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so that could be a really popular design. It looks like these might be T-tops right here over the driver, because it
Yeah.
looks like,
Very
I
nice.
see a bar in the middle. Looks like those can pop out. So that could be a really exciting
Are they giving the
vehicle design.
dimensions of the bed, the width and the length of the bed?
Um, Let me just take a look here.
So it's like a
I
Ford Ranger size, or it's not an F-150, I wouldn't think, size.
let me see what they give us. Yeah, it doesn't really give us a size in the. Oh, wait. Now I'm finding it. Okay, they're saying it could arrive. Oh, it may be something that takes till like 2030. Slightly
Okay.
smaller than a Rivian R1T. Now, the R1T is definitely smaller than like an F-150.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
Definitely.
probably more like the size of a Tacoma.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good
Something.
though.
Yeah, it's something different.
For an EV, yeah, that'd be nice.
Um, but let me see. So the first planned sedan, it's a sedan first EV platform to deliver a pair of low riding mid-sized sedans to replace the Maxima and the Ultima in mid 2026. So we're talking
Wow.
next year.
Very
Okay.
nice.
Data data is showing that coming out with two sedans is not what the market is asking for, certainly not at 45,000 plus price point.
Yeah.
So they have to figure some things out there. I mean, the US is heavily a crossover and
SUV.
SUV market.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just the way it is. Sedans are kind of on the, way out here.
Especially at $40,000, you're competing with the Toyota Camry in that price range, and Camry's got the credentials to go, reliability and lifespan, and you just hard to beat a Camry
I'm
hybrid.
surprised we haven't seen an all electric Camry yet.
Yeah, they went
It
hybrid,
just,
but not all electric.
yeah. And they've done a good job with their hybrid. Their hybrid gets
Yeah.
like 44 miles per gallon or something like that. I mean, it's a very fuel efficient. I mean, you think about that. That's about half as efficient as electric. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's getting there. I mean, it's getting
It's
there. You've
getting
got
there.
a few. You look at the Prius now. Realize the Prius can be plug-in as well, but when you've got 60 miles per gallon city and highway, that's really
Mhm.
about 2/3 as efficient as an EV. You
Yeah.
know, and I
Mhm.
guess maybe in that small size, it's half as efficient. But
Right.
it's kind of getting there. Nissan's got another design for a future Pathfinder
Mhm.
that would be electric. Let me see. I got a
Wow.
picture here. Yeah, so they're making some announcements. Nissan's got to do something. They've kind of been hurting lately.
Yeah,
There's
since
been concerns about their finances and
yeah,
where they're going. So I mean that's pretty sharp looking.
that's nice.
Yeah.
That is
Um,
nice.
it's interesting how Hyundai has kind of been the leader in this style of wheels,
Mhm.
and it seems like a lot of different companies are kind of adopting that type of wheels now. Let's see if there was anything else. Oh, they've talked about an electrified Nissan Frontier. Um, they
Mhm.
might sell the electric pickup alongside a less expensive hybrid Frontier. So they're looking at doing a hybrid or electrified Frontier, maybe a parallel hybrid technology where the internal combustion engine and electric motor power the wheels and deliver all-wheel drive capability. Uh,
Nice.
anyways, um,
At least some
we'll
variety is coming to the EV market now. I mean, that really just means that, wider adoption is right in front of us. Even with the slowdown in the government's, endorsement of EVs, I think it's at a price point now where it's going to start taking off more. especially in the used EV market.
Oh, yeah. Well, the used EV market, everything sells at $25,000.
The sweet spot.
Yeah, yeah. When any EV drops, used EV drops to 25,000, so it's eligible for the $4,000 tax credit. It just goes. It
Yeah,
just goes
you
quick.
gotta go.
Yeah.
That's where the explosion will be.
So I've got some semi-contradictory articles I'm going to share. So this first
Okay.
one is from Autoblog. U.S. EV sales rise year over year in March, defying tariff uncertainty. So EV sales have risen to a 9.3% market share compared to 8.4% a year earlier. Now, that's like a 12% increase, but
Right.
it's not massive. 23% of shoppers looking for a new vehicle are very likely to consider purchasing or leasing an EV in the next 12 months, matching February and up from 22.5%. So that's only slightly better than a year ago. It was 22.5 a year ago. It's 23% now. So, only went up 0.5%.
Wow.
Tesla's brand has decreased, but shoppers are considering EVs from Chevy, Ford, and Toyota, which I find kind of fascinating because you also have the really good sales of Hyundai EVs.
Yeah.
And, people just don't think to mention that they're out there. The highest number of drivers contemplating an EV earn more than 100,000 annually and live in Western or Northeastern states, which that kind of makes sense.
It does.
Let's see. Illinois had a really big jump in EV sales spurred by incentives. In January, 9,800 EVs were bought just in Illinois. And I'm sorry, 9,800 from January through March in a 3-month period compared to only 6,500 the year before. So that's about almost a 50% jump from the year before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if northern states can do it with their coal, then the rest of the country should easily adopt.
Oh, my animals got excited.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think adoption is going to be more. I think it's going to start ramping up, and especially with the Chevrolet Equinox, especially if you can get that Equinox that does bidirectional charging used off lease, that price is going to be unbelievable. I mean that's just going to be an unbelievable buy for your money.
Okay, get this. So now I want you to remember what I'm saying here. General Motors in that first quarter reported a 94% increase in EV sales from the year before. Now, to be fair, the Chevy Bolt had been discontinued in 24, and that was the primary EV that GM was selling a year ago. Okay, so discontinuing the Bolt hurt GM EV sales. Okay, Chevy's Equinox and Blazer were the driving forces behind the 94% increase. Ford's Mustang Mach-E sold a record high of 11,600 units in the first quarter.
For the whole year. Oh, for the first quarter. Very nice.
Wow. Porsche sold 18,800 delivered EVs in the United States in the first quarter. The third most popular model being the all-electric Taycan. The second best selling was the Porsche 718.
So Tesla's not anywhere in this list?
Oh, they're not covering Tesla numbers.
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, it's because Tesla isn't a dealership per se. So
direct market.
Okay. Tesla experienced its worst sales decline in history during quarter one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's helped a lot of the other companies get some growth. Yeah. So it's whatever Musk is doing has been exciting for the other companies. Now, so I mentioned that GM is up 94%, right? Okay. Here's the next story. General Motors announces temporary layoffs due to EV demand decline.
Whoa, what?
Yeah, I love the news. I mean, it's just great seeing some of this. So,
Wow.
the temporary layoff will allow Factory Zero to realign production with market demand. They announced that it's laying off about 200 workers at its flagship EV plant, Factory Zero Detroit Hamtramck Assembly Center. Despite nearly doubling its year-over-year growth in the EV segment, the company cites a dampening demand for EVs as a reason for the layoffs.
Wow.
GM spokesman Kevin Kelly say the decision isn't tariff related. It is due to shifting market conditions for the vehicles produced at that plant. The vehicle produces the Hummer EV. Well, that's $110,000. The
Yeah.
GMC Sierra EV, which is 90,000 plus. The
Yeah.
Silverado EV, also 90,000 plus, and the Escalade IQ, that's 150,000 plus.
We're outside the
Okay,
range. Yeah.
so yeah, so maybe they did have declining sales in that category.
Of course. You can only
Yeah,
sell so many of them ever.
yeah,
It's not the main market that are looking to buy vehicles in the 40s and the 50s.
yeah. I'm like looking at that. It's like so they're only doing the very very large EVs at that facility.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that was kind of surprising. That's what I was saying. We get a
All
certain
this
amount of
news.
wild stories in the news with
Yeah.
one situation. They're selling more Blazers and Equinox, but they're not selling the big full size trucks
Yeah.
or the full super big SUVs.
Yeah.
Um,
Makes sense.
Now that plant employs 4,500 workers, so they only laid off about 4% of the workforce.
That's still not bad
Yeah,
considering.
the, and they'll still receive sub pay and benefits under the GM UAW contract during the layoff period. So I suspect they plan on bringing all of those back. I
Yeah,
just
at some point.
I thought, what weird news when we have one where they're almost doubling sales and then another one where,
They
and
have
it's
to
really
lay
funny.
people off.
Well, I see this all the time. It's like GM's laying off people in the EV business due to low demand. And it's like, well, it's very
Mhm.
specific products, right? It's just, it's really easy to manipulate statistics and the news
Right.
and,
Absolutely.
put
I
it
know how you look at it.
in a certain spend. Because I find that just really, it's like, so they laid off 4% of the workers at one plant that make those four gigantic vehicles.
Vehicles, yeah.
Yeah. So I
It
don't
seemed
know.
like they would be able to redeploy that few people somewhere else in the plant or somewhere else to do something.
You'd think that um, was kind of a surprising deal. Let's see here. Um, all right, so I wanted to cover your topic. This one's kind of funny. I want to show the title to this Stupito because it's so funny. And this is from Sustainability News, and it says the U.S. on high alert. China's largest nuclear reactor passes final test as global power tensions explode. And what's funny is, and we'll get into the meat of this article, but at no point does it
Mhm.
ever talk about the US being,
Yeah.
anyway from the US making a political commentary on this. But it's like global power tensions. I mean,
Really?
you know,
Where?
yeah, I'm not aware of this, but but it's like the Sustainability Times. I was looking through a list of their titles, and they
Hmm.
all just have crazy,
Clickbait.
crazy. Yeah, it's just a little nuts. Um, no, this Joel, this part of the show is not AI generated, but we could be. You just never know. I
Yeah.
sometimes look a little AI-ish. You know, I've had people ask before on some of our clips if it was AI, and in truth, I've done some AI videos, but it's my
Hmm.
voice. The AI is
Yeah.
my voice where I used a program to do it, and it's
Right.
scary how much better my AI version speaks than I do. But it's clearly my voice. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So um anyways, yeah, I have a channel that features a lot of business AI stuff. and it's but we also stream the show to that channel as well.
Okay, very nice.
It's got a lot more subscribers than
Yeah.
the EV channel, so I get a little bit more exposure there. But anyways, China's Jiangsu nuclear power plant has achieved a milestone by completing a hot functional test for its second unit, paving the way for fuel loading and integration into the national grid. I went through some of the numbers. So they're planning on 6 reactors, and they're saying they'll deliver 10 billion kilowatt hours of electricity per year, which is kind of, I don't
It
know. That's
sounds
not, to
big
me,
in
that
kilowatts, but how many
it's,
megawatts does that convert to?
well, it's a, um, here's where it started. Got. And so each nuclear reactor is capable of, it says, 1,000,000 kilowatt range. So that's a gigawatt. So that's
A gigawatt.
1,000 megawatts.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking 6 gigawatts, which is huge. I've been looking at some of the larger nuclear projects across the globe. There's a lot of them. They're in the like 1.2 gigawatt space, stuff like that. This one's over 6. I think it's really going to be more like 7.2.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's total 7.2 gigawatts, and the plant's full operation. They say 7.2 million kilowatts. Well, that's, I'm just expressing it in a larger number, which equals 10 billion kilowatt hours annually. And it says this can supply the annual electricity needs of 1 million people in moderately developed countries. Well, in reality, a megawatt can support, in a moderately developed country, about 400 to 500 homes. In the United States, a megawatt supports 200 to 400 homes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, they're saying this gigantic thing. You'd think it would power the entire country, right? They're saying it'll power 1 million homes. I think it's, a really, I don't know. They don't make it sound as great as they did earlier when they were saying all these billions. I don't know if that one's up or not, Joel. I really haven't paid that close of attention to what Georgia's doing in nuclear. This has been one of the problems with nuclear, and when we have Mike on Wednesdays, we talk about this frequently, is a lot of nuclear, the math doesn't work out to be cheaper than solar and battery storage or wind energy. And so it's not that, and a lot of that has to do with the safety features in the large nuclear situations. And I was talking to Bobby before the show about some changes coming in the small reactors. And the small reactors, once again, they're not producing cheaper electricity, but they can avoid transmission costs by being built near where the energy is needed. And to give you some idea, there's a lot of parts of the United States, especially, say, Hawaii. The average person pays something like 36 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity in Hawaii. And part of it is transmitting and having the power be where the citizens are that use it. And so some of these small nuclear reactors can produce power for, say, 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay. And if you have that close to where the power is needed, then there's no transmission cost. But when we talk about, so hydroelectric in Washington State is produced for about 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. In Quebec, it's produced for 3 cents. In a lot of parts of the United States, commercial, where I live in Nebraska, the big data centers buy power from the grid here for about 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So those small nuclear reactors don't compete with that.
Yeah.
Right. So in some parts, it just doesn't work. And so we had the smallest nuclear power plant in the United States, the Fort Calhoun nuclear power plant. They took it offline back in about 2018 because the economics just didn't make sense compared to wind power.
They
So
might
it
be
wasn't,
bringing it back now.
well, you never know. You never know. It wasn't like a woke decision or anything like that.
Economics.
It was purely economics. I'm going to tell you a lot of things in the green energy space. the economics are amazing, okay, compared to other sources, but you have to have steady sources of power.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Iceland does a great job. Um, so there are some things evolving in the geothermal space. I've not seen great um, great arguments about getting that to market. Um, but I have seen people with ideas and things because we've talked about geothermal on the show before.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have a dictator here in Nebraska, at least not yet. You know, yeah. But you hear for a while in the in the whatchamacallit, in the save the planet space. Okay, you have so many people that are like anti-nuclear because of you had Chernobyl, you had Fukushima, and all that, but they keep
You have
making these
spent
things
uranium that takes thousands of years for it to become neutralized. It's just,
right.
yeah, after it's spent.
Yeah, so
So,
there's other issues. With nuclear, it has its own negatives, but people come up with negatives about a lot of the like solar panels and and the wind turbines. Like, what do you do with the blades when you replace them? And there's a lot of questions about various green energies too. Nothing's ideal. Nothing
I agree.
seems to be perfect. But like Joel was talking about geothermal, I mean, I've seen people who design geothermal systems for their homes. And
Wow.
they had the tunnels dug under the house to supply
Wow.
geothermal heat in the winter and cooling in the summer.
Hmm.
And I have a friend who has a very large home in Vermont, but it's up like in the mountains,
Hmm.
and he spends his summers there, and they have geothermal. And he said up until the last few years, they didn't actually need an air conditioner in the house in the summer, but
Wow.
they ended up having to put an air conditioner in the last few years because it's been getting hotter. So,
Climate change.
yeah, you know, it's hard to say, you know, um,
I do think that electricity is going to become at some point the new oil. And I think this reversing of net metering, I think they're
mhm,
going to wind up reversing them not supporting it because I think the coming technologies of AI and EVs and when I get my Optimus Primus robot that's going to have to plug in all night. All of these things, even crypto, if you do crypto mining at your house, you're using a lot of power to run it and cool it. All of these things are very, very they're energy hogs. And so at some point, if the grid is being stressed now, when these things start coming online, it's going to be incredible demand.
mhm. Yeah, I think there was a nuclear power plant incident deeper in the Soviet Union than Chernobyl,
Chernobyl,
which was in northern Ukraine, which
Ukraine,
is
yeah.
it's on the border of Belarus, but I
Okay,
think it's less than like 10 miles from Belarus. Okay.
okay.
But how Western Europe found out about that was because all of a sudden radioactivity started popping up over the Scandinavian countries
That's
because
not the way
it
you
was
want to find out.
no,
Wow.
but I think the other incident was very minor in comparison to Chernobyl. But you look in the United States, we had the 3 Mile Island incident. I mean, what a lot of people don't know is they're reopening 3 Mile Island because I think Amazon bought it
Wow.
or something like that. I mean, it's going to power like either an Amazon, I think it's an Amazon data center.
Hmm.
You know, I'm not 100% that that's who it is, but it's interesting just to see that there's so much requirements for um, steady power sources for AI. And
Hmm.
it's just crazy. And when you look at it, Google basically go and do a Google search now, they give you the AI results, right? Well, an AI search uses 10 times as much electricity as a
Google.
regular search. So I'm
Hmm.
surprised they did that, but it
Yeah.
really did improve the quality of the responses. So
Yeah.
the negative is if you had a website, now your data is being pulled by Google and they're displaying a abbreviated version of that for people to see, and then maybe they aren't clicking on your web page anymore.
Yeah.
So it's reducing traffic that was actually going to people So there's pluses and minuses. If you're one of those people creating content, you may not be getting the traffic that you should be, or your traffic is all robots. Geothermal heat pumps for 30 SEER compared to air, which average around 15. The cost to install does not make it economical unless you pay high energy prices. Yeah, and that's a part of a lot of energy. Coal has its virtues and merits in certain parts of the world, particularly in the steel industry. You think it's like, what is somebody doing to putting in more coal? I mean, we announced on here that India intends to increase its use of coal by like 50% between now and 2030.
Wow.
Like they have a target. It's like, this is the goal we hope to achieve, but it's mostly to support the steel forging industry. And so, at those places, they obviously need a good source of heat and electricity, and it's the best solution for them.
But that's the exact opposite of what China did. China used to be heavily coal. I mean, it was so bad that you had to wear a mask out in public just to breathe, and it was having horrendous effects. And so they flipped to electric. They get rid of all these cars and stop burning as much coal and try to get as green as, and it really has helped their air, in which case, the air from China comes across California to us. So it helps everybody. So going in the other direction just don't seem healthy for anybody.
So this 7.2 gigawatts of nuclear is expected to have the equivalent effect on the environment of planting 70 million trees a year.
Yeah,
okay,
wow.
because trees absorb carbon out of the air. Okay, because they absorb CO2, right? Okay, it's expected to reduce standard coal use by 3.12, just say 3 million tons of coal, and cut carbon dioxide by 8 million tons per year. And like I said, that's the equivalent of planting 70 million trees. So, China's trying to do its part, but they're the world's manufacturing location. And so their argument is that the United States consumes 25% of all goods in the world. Okay, we're only 5% of the population. So we 5x our size compared to the rest of the world in terms of useful resources, but we have China make all that stuff. And, we have all this going on with tariffs trying to bring manufacturing back, but then you've got to deal with how do we make cleaner manufacturing here in the United States? Well, some of it's what I was telling you earlier. SMR reactors are going to be a big part of that, I think. But even then, you can't build SMR reactors as cheaply as you can provide the energy from solar in some cases. So solar might cost, well, here's the thing. So when you build a solar farm, the solar farm is only like 14% efficient. Okay. So if you have 100 megawatt solar farm, it's the equivalent. So a nuclear is almost 100% efficient. And meaning because it's running regardless of the weather and regardless of climate, where the sun's positioned, whether it's daytime, nighttime, or whatever. So 100 megawatts of solar is about the equivalent of 14 megawatts of nuclear.
Yeah, nice.
And the price isn't a whole lot different in terms of installing that. And then additionally with the with the solar, you have to have battery storage to be able to store it so it's used at optimal times. And with the nuclear, it's more, use it as you have it. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see. And the cost of additional reactors. So like I was telling you about having 13 megawatts on the first batch, that might be like $100 million for that first 13 megawatts, which is only effectively 10 megawatts pumping out of the plant. But if you have a second one, it's probably no more than 50 or $60 million for the next 13 megawatts, which adds another 13. And then the next reactor is a little cheaper. So as each one gets a little bit cheaper, and so it actually ends up being cheaper than it gets cheaper than solar by a good chunk.
I read an article about solar. This company was trying to have dual use and grow crops under the solar panels.
Hmm.
And they were saying that they had some vegetables, I forget what they said now, that had better growth under a semi-shaded environment under solar panels. And so
Well,
if you, mhm,
I've seen this in Africa where they have solar panels like 10 or 12 feet off the ground, and
mhm,
they are doing what you're saying. They're growing vegetables underneath in the shade. And
mhm,
then, but there's something about the solar panels collect condensation, and they
mhm.
actually drop some condensation on the plants to keep them watered. I don't
There
know
you
how all
go.
that works. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
that'll
above
be
my head.
awesome. Yeah.
Owen, I'm sorry that Bill's not here today. We start talking about mycelium. That's Bill's actually kind of an expert on using various fungus
Mushrooms?
and mushrooms to absorb various kinds of carbon and radioactivity and other things. Yeah. Um,
He's not
Bill,
saying Bill using mushrooms, right? No.
no, not saying that, but Bill actually,
I'm
he has
kidding.
some really, because he's been doing this show for a long time, and he's been
Yeah.
aggregating news, at least like 100+ articles a day, 7 days a
Wow.
week, for, you
Wow.
figure, since the 90s. Okay, so
Wow.
the number of articles he's gone through is just staggering. You,
Phenomenal.
you look at it, he's probably gone through 1 million articles. I
Wow.
mean, it's just, maybe my
That's
numbers are off.
phenomenal.
It's just a ridiculous amount of articles, and he really knows a lot about things that you and I will never know because he spent so much time going through all this. Um,
Solar Time just uh, came up with a term, Aggie. What did he say?
oh no,
Aggie
I've seen this agrivoltaics.
voltaics.
No, this
Very
is
cool.
real. This is a real
I
thing.
never saw that before.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And oh yeah, plenty of sun in Arizona. Um, but I think they can actually make solar cells more efficient than that even.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I've seen some claims of solar being manufactured in some other countries that were far higher than what they do in the US. And I don't know. I sometimes wonder if there really is stuff in that space being um, kept out of the public.
Yeah, because
Um,
they've been stuck at, I think, 28% efficiency for forever, it seems like.
mhm. Yeah, it's not been where it should be.
Yeah.
No, but there's a lot of things. I mean, eventually you're going to see people stop it. All these other things, nuclear, green energy, all that, it's going to replace coal and LNG at some point.
Yes.
Okay, but you have to have enough of it. It has to be. The thing is, people aren't. In some places, they're going to do it because it's greener, but I think most of it is the green that goes in your wallet more than
Yeah.
it's going to be, you know,
Yeah.
the green where people are concerned about other people's health and stuff like that. I don't know. That's just my take on it because I talk to Bill about this all the time. It's like EVs are taking over because they're economically viable now.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're it's going to be gas cars. They're talking about. We got an article about California. California might not lose its EV mandate after all. A Senate ruling blocks Republicans' attempt to end the California 2035 gas car ban. Well, okay, so I'm really big on states' rights. Okay,
Yeah.
if California wants to ban gas cars, that's their right. Okay, I'm just what's good for California doesn't mean it's good for Nebraska.
Yeah.
Okay, and so if we don't want to mandate that, we don't have to mandate it. People can drive what they want in Nebraska. If you want to go live in California where the weather's nicer, and deal with that, that's your prerogative. Do I think that everybody out there will eventually switch to an EV anyways, whether they mandate it or not? Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
You're going to have other things. I mean, people are still going to want to have like a McLaren or a Lamborghini, some kind of specialized exotic car. or something like that. But it really doesn't make sense for a daily driver to not be electric. And especially with the prices coming down. I'm not covering the article today, but Jeff Bezos has invested some money in some company on the West Coast that's trying to produce a $25,000 American electric pickup truck. Okay. I don't know if they can hit that price point. It's just difficult to do.
Alone.
Yeah, well, the price is bad on the road. But we had Jigger Shaw in here from the Department of Energy, and he was like saying, hey, drive an EV at home. If you need to take a road trip, go rent a car.
Rent a car.
Go rent a gas car. And to a certain degree, there's some truth to that. It seems like an easy solution. The biggest challenge right now for EVs are people who don't have a dedicated parking spot where they can have a charger.
Condos,
that's the single biggest challenge. And people try to come up with all this other stuff. Oh, they're not as green as they say, they're not this or that. But the truth is there's still not great solutions for those. But in China, where they have the battery swap technology, and they've already got 3,000 battery swap stations in China. It's really hard to fathom that 3,000. We don't have any in the United States. At least there might be a prototype, but there's not, regular ones for the public to go to. It's just kind of interesting to see that.
It seemed like it would be a pretty good investment, especially if nobody's swapping batteries. It could sell those stored cell power that they have stored waiting to be swapped back to the grid on peak times, But I think what would really be awesome is if in this country, let's say I had my EV, I'm staying local, I'm driving away from home, I get a message on my screen says, hey, the grid needs some power, can you help? I go to a Tesla supercharger or any EV charger, plug in, and it vehicles to grid through that location back to the grid, and I get paid. And then you'd have all of these batteries and all these vehicles are able to help the grid out when it's needed, no matter if they're home or not.
What's for child and slave labor? I don't know about that. I see all this stuff about child labor and slave labor in the Congo, where they forget Apple, where they mine cobalt. So cobalt is used in cell phones and EVs and a lot of other stuff. And they're starting to make batteries that don't access that. But I don't know that child and slave labor is making cobalt economical. Okay. They're trying to get away from cobalt because the Democratic Republic of the Congo is not, on terms of being a great player to its population, it's a dictatorship. It's just not a great actor. And for them to have what they have in terms of world cobalt, I'm sure there's other places that can, supply cobalt. It's just they haven't figured that out yet. It can't be the only place on the planet that has that. But
maybe
that's where all of it comes from.
Maybe a cobalt meteor hit the Earth 1 billion years ago in one spot. That would be the only reason why it would only be in one spot. That would be crazy.
Yeah, but anyways, back to the car ban. So apparently, the congressional Republicans tried to see if they could use the Congressional Review Act to revoke California's waiver under the Clean Air Act, which lets the state ban the sale of new gas-powered cars by 2035. Now, if you've watched me much, I'm not a fan of this. I'm not a fan of mandates. We live in the United States. I don't think the government gets the right to tell people you can't do something. And and that may be true. It might, but I think that mandates aren't really necessary. I like incentives.
Yeah.
I'm pro incentive. I'm anti mandate. But the thing is, California has these mandates, and like 12 other states have said we are going to mimic whatever California does. So whatever the rule is in California, we're going to adopt those too. And so that's outside the federal, they were calling it the federal mandate that was basically the way the EPA was doing. So there's lithium all over the planet. Okay. The largest source of lithium in Europe is oddly in the Donbass in the Ukraine, where the fighting's all going on. But one of the largest lithium deposits in the United States, well, in the world, is in Nevada. Okay.
Wow.
And they just, the group that's mining that just closed a deal where they raised $250 million to start mining that. Now, of course, it's on an Indian burial ground.
Oh, boy.
Or something.
There's
And so
always something.
there's always something, right? And the United States could be independent on a lot of things. And it's just, man, you can't make everybody happy. That's one thing about being in a free society. Okay. When you're in these dictatorships like the Congo, the only person you got to make happy is the dictator. All right. Nobody else counts. Okay. But in the United States, every voice is heard. Okay. Which is the way it should be, right? It should be everybody's voice heard. But sometimes something that's good for the people just doesn't happen because, it's negative for a, certain population. I'm not trying to crap on American Indians by any stretch, but that whole thing, I'm just like, what do you do? What do you
can't win for losing, it seems like.
Right. But anyways, yeah, I'm against some of the stuff. I think some of the stuff California does is dumb. Some of the stuff where, like they said, you can't drive semi trucks in California that were made before like 2010.
Wow, why? Emissions?
They did that a few years ago. They did that. It had to do with emissions and all that, but it caused all kinds of problems, like during COVID with trying to get stuff from the port of Long Beach.
Wow, I could imagine.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff just, I don't know. There's a lot of laws made with good intentions that nobody really knows what the after effects. It's just like the IRA. We talked about, who would have thought that it had produced something like 120,000 green energy jobs in Republican states? Nobody saw that coming. That wasn't the plan. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to create jobs, but it wasn't to put them in Republican states. It's just that all the manufacturers were smart and they put them all in Republican states. And it was only 10% of the green energy jobs from the IRA went to blue states.
Wow.
90% went to
states are buying most of the EVs, aren't they, in blue states? California, blue states. Yeah.
But they're being made in the red states.
You gotta love it.
Yeah, I mean it's really surprising, to see some of this. Anyways, well, Bobby, that's all I've got for today. I want to thank you for coming on today, and folks for chiming in. And as always, it's good to see, a
lot of comments, a lot of feedback today.
Yeah, solar. Gas costs people a lot of money. It's definitely, if you have solar power at home and you drive EVs, it's really an ideal situation. You got cheap electricity, you got, cheap to operate vehicle that hardly needs maintenance. I mean, it's all going to change. And like what Bobby was saying, there's all these things where you can use your EV as a battery to help sell power back to the grid.
Make money off your residents. That's what we do.
Went with a full charge. You only drove 76 miles and the battery was almost dead. Well, it depends a little bit on how you're running the battery, how you're, if you're preheating the battery before you went driving. There's a whole lot of situations that can affect that range. I see these things, people talk about some example that happened in the United States, and it's like, but EV adoption is much higher in Canada, and there's all kinds of taxi companies. There's taxi companies in Canada that operate Teslas. And then on the flip side, you've also got Norway, where almost they're at 100% of they got rid of petrol cars completely as far as new cars, and they, you know, they don't have the problem.
And they're
So
freezing up there. They're freezing in Norway.
yeah, but there could
most of
also
the
be
time.
something wrong with that Tesla Model Y's battery too. You know, you never know. It's always possible to find one-off situations where something just weird happened. It was like the guy from Canada who bought that Ford Lightning pickup truck and decided he was going to drive it into the States on a road trip, and then he got stuck in Minnesota because the charging stations didn't work.
Yeah.
You know, and there was no alternative places to charge because there aren't a whole lot of charging stations. And I tell people all the time, and now that situation's finally changed. Okay, if you're ever going to road trip and you didn't have a Tesla, you were probably going to have a bad experience. Okay, and because Tesla created a working supercharger network, and in the past year, they've opened it up to like 8 or 10 other car manufacturers, and it's a huge difference. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me that Norway would do that. It's funny because Norway is per capita, I think they might be the richest country in the world, or have the most, the government holds the most wealth per citizen because they don't have a very big population. Yeah, their sovereign wealth fund is incredibly well off.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, but what they've done is, unlike the United States, where all that money's in Exxon and Chevron and companies like that, the the Norwegian government controls all the money that came out of all the oil exploration and all of that. Their natural resources all went to government. Kind of Kuwait's kind of that way. You know, you got some of the Arab countries are a little bit that way. Anyways, well, folks, I want to thank everybody for chiming in, and we had lots of people chatting. I appreciate all of the comments, and I'll be back tomorrow with Mike Herzog and Nicolo Ferrari, who is with a company called Voltest. So he was with Ferrari and Ducati at different times, and now he's with a company called Voltest, and he's going to talk to us about what they do. So I think that should be quite interesting, and Mike will be with us as well. Anyways, otherwise, folks, have a great day. We'll be back tomorrow. All right, bye-bye.